The Universal Standards Bureau existed in a state of perpetual bureaucratic paralysis, which its administrators insisted reflected the careful deliberation required when establishing measurements that governed interstellar commerce across 156 civilizations. Located on Concordia Hub, a diplomatic station positioned at the gravitational center of nothing particularly important, the Bureau attracted the most pedantic minds from species spanning the galaxy, all united by their shared conviction that precision mattered more than practicality. The Grand Verification Chamber represented architectural compromise on a scale that made engineers question their career choices. The circular room stretched 200 meters in diameter, its walls lined with measurement instruments from every major civilization's scientific tradition. Gravitational sensors hung from the ceiling alongside electromagnetic field detectors, quantum state analyzers, and devices whose function remained mysterious even to their operators. The floor consisted of polished composite material calibrated to reflect exactly 23.7% of incident light, a specification that had required 6 years of committee meetings to finalize. 419 delegates occupied seats arranged in concentric rings around a central verification platform. The seating algorithm accommodated beings ranging from gaseous entities requiring containment fields to rock-based life forms whose mass required structural reinforcement beneath their positions. Environmental controls maintained 38 distinct atmospheric zones, separated by force barriers that shimmered whenever someone moved too enthusiastically during the tedious proceedings that consumed most verification sessions. Eric slouched in a chair designed for beings with exoskeletons, and apparently no spine flexibility whatsoever. His human anatomy fought against the contours, leaving him perched at an angle that would require physical therapy if maintained much longer. He'd been stationed on Concordia Hub for 8 months as Earth's representative to the Bureau's Measurement Standardization Committee, a position that sounded prestigious in the recruitment materials, but mostly involved listening to arguments about decimal precision that lasted for weeks. The current session focused on verifying the universal gravitational constant, a fundamental value that every civilization used for calculating everything from planetary orbits to interstellar navigation. The constant had been established 8,000 rotations ago through collaborative measurements by the founding species of the Galactic Council. Every generation since had re-verified the value using increasingly sophisticated instruments, always confirming the original measurement to absurd levels of precision. High Metrologist Vornx presided over the verification ceremony with the gravitas of someone who believed measurement standards represented civilization's highest achievement. His species, the Quillians, resembled enormous porcupines constructed from metallic spines that chimed musically whenever he moved. His voice, translated through harmonic resonance, filled the chamber with tones that somehow conveyed both authority and insufferable self-importance. Esteemed colleagues, honored delegates, distinguished observers, Vornx began, his spines vibrating with ceremonial precision. We gather this rotation to perform the sacred duty of verification. The universal gravitational constant represents foundational truth upon which all stellar mechanics depend. Our measurements will confirm, as they have for millennia, the accuracy of this fundamental value. A cylindrical measurement apparatus rose from the platform floor with hydraulic ceremony. The device stood 3 meters tall, its surface covered in calibration marks from 40 different numbering systems. Inside, precisely machined masses hung from impossibly thin filaments, their separation distance controlled by quantum-locked positioning systems accurate to subatomic scales. Gravitational attraction between the masses could be measured with precision that made particle physicists weep with joy. The verification apparatus, Vornx announced, his harmonic tones carrying reverence normally reserved for religious artifacts, represents collaborative engineering achievement by 23 civilizations. Each component manufactured to tolerances that approach theoretical limits of physical construction. The measurements we obtain today will confirm the universal gravitational constant to 34 decimal places of precision. The audience responded with appropriate sounds of appreciation. A serpentine delegate from the coiled reaches produced whistling harmonics that translated as professional admiration. The crystalline scholar Prismka chimed her faceted body in rhythmic patterns indicating ceremonial respect. Even the gelatinous representative from the flowing collective, normally immune to displays of emotion, rippled with what might have been impressed acknowledgement. Eric raised his hand. The gesture took several seconds to register because most species present communicated attention requests through bioluminescence, pheromone release, or electromagnetic pulses. Eventually, a monitoring system recognized the human signal and highlighted his position with a subtle indicator light. Vornix's spines stopped their ceremonial vibration, creating dissonant silence. His translator managed to inject confusion into harmonic tones that didn't naturally support such nuance. The human delegate requests clarification? Yeah, quick question. Eric straightened despite his chair's protest. Has anyone ever verified the constant using gravitational fields that aren't artificially generated in laboratory conditions? The chamber fell silent with an intensity that approached quantum vacuum in its completeness. 419 delegates collectively stopped non-essential biological processes. Even the environmental systems seemed to pause circulation, as if the station itself awaited explanation for this interruption. Vornix's spines performed confused harmonics. Explain the inquiry's relevance. Well, every verification I've seen in the historical records uses precision masses in controlled laboratory environments, Eric continued. But the constant is supposed to be universal, right? Shouldn't it work the same way in natural gravitational fields? Has anyone actually checked whether the lab measurements match what happens with real planets and stars? Diplomatic liaison Shrix, whose species resembled bipedal starfish with excessive credentials in conflict avoidance, attempted intervention with the desperate energy of someone watching protocol violations unfold in real time. Her skin color shifted through patterns indicating diplomatic alarm. The human clearly lacks context for understanding verification methodology. Perhaps we should continue the ceremony and address educational gaps through appropriate channels afterward. Eric wasn't listening. He'd already accessed the Bureau's historical database through his personal terminal, scrolling through thousands of verification records. Every measurement used the same basic approach. Precision masses in laboratory conditions, controlled environmental variables, isolated systems designed to eliminate external influences. Nobody had ever compared these laboratory values against measurements from actual celestial bodies. I'm just saying, Eric persisted. If we want to verify a universal constant, maybe we should verify it works universally, not just in laboratories that eliminate everything that makes the universe complicated. Vornix's harmonic translator began producing overtones suggesting the device struggled with processing improper suggestions during sacred ceremony. Laboratory conditions provide precision necessary for accurate measurement. Natural gravitational fields contain too many variables, too much interference, too many uncontrolled factors. Measurement would be impossible. Difficult, Eric corrected. Not impossible. We've got orbital mechanics data from thousands of star systems. Planetary positions tracked over centuries. If the gravitational constant is actually constant, the orbital calculations should match observed reality using the verified laboratory value. A delegate from the Hive Collective, whose distributed intelligence manifested as swarm of small flying organisms that functioned as single consciousness, buzzed with patterns translating as scandalized disbelief. Suggesting that laboratory verification requires validation through crude astronomical observation undermines entire methodological foundation of precision measurement science. I'm not undermining anything, Eric protested. I'm suggesting we check our work using independent data sources. That's basic experimental validation. The chamber erupted into multilingual chaos that the translation systems struggled to parse. Delegates argued in their native communication methods, creating sensory overload of sound, light, chemical signals, and electromagnetic pulses. The crystalline faction demanded formal censure for disrupting sacred verification. The gaseous researchers produced vibrations indicating methodological uncertainty. The rock-based delegation began calculating structural implications of foundational assumptions being questioned. Administrator Krell, the station's chief bureaucrat who resembled an ambulatory filing cabinet with anxiety issues, materialized via holographic projection. His translated voice carried tones of someone whose carefully organized rotation had just encountered chaos. Order will be maintained. The verification ceremony will proceed according to established protocols. Wait, this came from researcher Theln, an elderly scientist whose species resembled aquatic mammals adapted for vacuum survival. Her translated voice carried weight of decades spent in measurement science. The human raises valid point. We have assumed laboratory measurements represent universal truth without validating against natural phenomena. Perhaps we should examine astronomical data before dismissing the concern. Vornix's spines vibrated with what his translator rendered as defensive outrage. The universal gravitational constant has been verified through rigorous methodology for 8,000 rotations. Questioning its accuracy based on theoretical concerns about astronomical validation represents profound disrespect for collaborative scientific achievement. Not questioning accuracy, Eric clarified. Just suggesting we verify the verification. If the constant is correct, astronomical data will confirm it. If there's a discrepancy, we should probably know about that before we continue building interstellar infrastructure based on potentially flawed values. Theln had already begun accessing astronomical databases, her aquatic appendages moving with practiced efficiency across holographic interfaces. I am retrieving orbital mechanics data from the Kepler archive. 3,000 star systems with planetary positions tracked over multiple centuries. We can calculate predicted orbits using the verified gravitational constant and compare against observed positions. This is unnecessary, Vornix insisted, though his harmonic tones showed wavering certainty. Laboratory measurements provide precision that astronomical observations cannot match. Precision is meaningless if it's precisely wrong, Eric countered. You can measure something incorrectly to 30 decimal places and still be measuring the wrong thing. The verification ceremony ground to halt as Theln worked through calculations that had apparently never been considered necessary. The chamber filled with anticipatory tension, every delegate present recognizing that foundational assumptions faced unexpected challenge. Some researchers pulled up their own databases, independently checking calculations as if expecting to find error in methodology rather than measurement. Minutes stretched into what felt like geological ages as Theln's computational systems processed centuries of astronomical data against theoretical predictions. Eric watched the holographic displays populate with comparison matrices, each data point representing years of careful observation by civilizations that had tracked stellar positions with religious devotion. The silence in the chamber had transformed from shocked to expectant, every being present aware that something significant was about to unfold. Prismka, the crystalline scholar, had begun her own independent analysis using different astronomical datasets. Her faceted body refracted light in patterns that indicated intense concentration. Several other delegates followed suit, apparently deciding that if foundational assumptions were being questioned, they wanted to verify the results themselves rather than trust anyone else's calculations. Theln's holographic display populated with comparison data. Predicted orbital positions based on the verified gravitational constant appeared alongside observed planetary locations from millennia of astronomical records. The two datasets should have overlapped perfectly if the constant was accurate. They didn't overlap. Not even close. Discrepancy detected, Theln announced, her voice carrying tones of someone discovering her career might require reassessment. Predicted orbital positions deviate from observed locations by margins averaging 3.7% across all measured systems. The deviation increases with distance from stellar primary and extends across all gravitational field strengths. Prismka's analysis completed simultaneously, her light patterns flickering with what her species used for expressions of disturbed realization. Confirmation of Theln's findings. My independent dataset shows identical deviation pattern. The laboratory constant consistently underestimates gravitational effects in natural stellar systems. A third researcher, Grolm from the Granite Collective, produced rumbling sounds that translated as reluctant agreement. I have checked against binary star orbital mechanics. Same discrepancy. The verified constant predicts orbital periods that are consistently longer than observed reality. The chamber fell into a new quality of silence, one that transcended mere absence of sound and entered territory of collective existential crisis. 419 delegates sat motionless as implications propagated through their awareness like gravitational waves through space-time. 3.7%? Eric repeated. That's not measurement error. That's fundamental wrongness. Vornix's spines had stopped vibrating entirely, creating eerie stillness from a being whose species normally communicated through constant harmonic motion. This cannot be accurate. The gravitational constant has been verified thousands of times. Technology functions. Spacecraft navigate successfully. Therefore, constant must be correct. Technology functions, Eric agreed. But maybe we've been compensating for the error without realizing it. Ship navigation systems probably include correction factors that engineers attributed to other variables like stellar wind or quantum drag or whatever. But maybe those correction factors exist because the fundamental constant we're using is wrong. Diplomatic liaison. Shrix's skin patterns shifted to colors indicating full diplomatic crisis mode. If the universal gravitational constant is incorrect, this affects every calculation involving gravity across all 156 member civilizations: orbital mechanics, planetary engineering, stellar cartography, space-time navigation, all potentially compromised. I propose immediate comprehensive analysis, Theln said, her appendages already pulling additional data sets. We need measurements from multiple independent sources: laboratory values, astronomical observations, spacecraft navigation records, planetary tide calculations. If discrepancy appears consistently, we must acknowledge possibility that verified constant is systematically inaccurate. Administrator Krell's holographic presence expanded as he allocated processing resources to what was rapidly becoming the most significant crisis in Bureau history. All delegates will remain in chamber pending completion of analysis. No information regarding potential measurement discrepancy will be transmitted outside this facility until we understand the scope of the problem. The force barriers across every exit shimmered into active containment mode, politely but firmly preventing departure. Security systems activated along the perimeter, not because anyone expected violence, but because protocols for handling foundational crises required comprehensive information control. Eric found himself at the center of unwanted attention as delegates realized the human had potentially uncovered systematic error that had persisted for 8 millennia. Some researchers stared with what their species used for expressions of horrified respect. Others made gestures indicating they blamed him personally for discovering problems they'd preferred remained hidden. The hive collective's swarm coalesced into tighter formation, their buzzing taking on interrogative patterns. Human delegate possesses background in gravitational physics. Educational credentials justify questioning established measurement standards. I have bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering, Eric admitted. Most of my actual expertise involves industrial equipment maintenance. I just noticed that nobody seemed to be checking laboratory results against real-world data. This admission created a fresh wave of consternation. The revelation that foundational assumptions had been overturned by someone whose primary qualification was noticing obvious gaps in methodology felt somehow more insulting than if a credentialed astrophysicist had made the discovery. Vornik stood motionless on the platform, his entire professional existence crumbling in real time. He'd built his career on measurement precision, published hundreds of papers on verification methodology, trained generations of metrologists in techniques that apparently produced consistently inaccurate results. His upcoming textbook on gravitational measurement, already in final editing, would need complete revision or possibly ceremonial burning. You, Vornix's harmonics emerged as broken dissonance, have destroyed confidence in foundational measurement that enables galactic civilization. Eric opened his mouth to respond, probably with something about how pointing out errors shouldn't destroy confidence in things that were never actually accurate, then reconsidered. Sometimes silence represented better choice than honesty, especially when surrounded by 400 furious scientists trapped in mandatory quarantine. Theln continued working through data sets with methodical thoroughness that suggested decades of research experience. She pulled spacecraft navigation logs, comparing predicted trajectories based on the gravitational constant against actual flight paths requiring correction. She analyzed planetary tide measurements, checking whether observed tidal forces matched calculations using the verified value. She examined binary star orbital mechanics, testing whether stellar positions aligned with gravitational predictions. Every dataset showed the same pattern. The verified laboratory constant consistently underestimated gravitational effects in natural conditions by approximately 3.7%. The discrepancy appears universal, Theln announced after 2 hours of continuous analysis. Laboratory measurements produce one value. Natural gravitational phenomena demonstrate different value. The laboratory constant is systematically low by margin that remains consistent across all tested conditions. How is this possible? Demanded a delegate from the crystalline assembly. We have measured gravitational attraction between precision masses thousands of times. Results always confirm the established constant. Because laboratory conditions eliminate variables that apparently matter, Eric suggested. You're measuring gravity in perfect vacuum, isolated from external fields, using masses that are small compared to planets or stars. Maybe gravity behaves differently at different scales. Or maybe there's environmental factors that laboratory isolation removes, but that exist in natural conditions. Theln's aquatic appendages froze mid-gesture. That would suggest gravitational constant isn't actually constant, that it varies based on environmental context or field strength. Or, Eric continued, maybe the fundamental equation relating gravitational force to mass and distance is incomplete. Maybe there's additional terms that become significant at planetary scales but are negligible in laboratory conditions. The implications crash through the assembled delegates like cascade failure through crystalline structure. If the gravitational constant varied with conditions, or if the foundational equations were incomplete, then 8,000 years of physics required revision. Every calculation involving gravity became suspect. Technologies designed around theoretical predictions might function through fortunate accident rather than genuine understanding. Vornix had recovered enough composure to access historical archives, his spines vibrating with frantic energy. There are references here to early researchers questioning laboratory measurements, multiple proposals to validate against astronomical data, all rejected by review committees as unnecessary, given precision of controlled experiments. Let me guess, Eric said. The rejection justifications argued that laboratory precision was superior to astronomical observation, so validating precise measurements against imprecise data would introduce error rather than confirm accuracy. Exactly that reasoning, Vornix confirmed, his harmonics carrying tones of dawning horror. We dismissed validation because we believed our methodology was too good to require external confirmation. Shrix had begun damage control calculations, her skin cycling through colors faster than her physiology normally permitted. We need strategy for announcing this discovery without causing panic. Interstellar navigation depends on gravitational calculations. If spacecraft operators lose confidence in fundamental constants, we might see transportation networks shut down across the galaxy. The ships still work, Eric pointed out. They've always worked despite using incorrect constant because navigation systems compensate with correction factors. We're not discovering that gravity doesn't exist. We're discovering we've been measuring it wrong in laboratories while getting it approximately right in practical applications. Approximately right isn't good enough for precision engineering, countered the Hive Collective's distributed consciousness. Orbital habitats, gravitational slingshot maneuvers, planetary terraforming, all require accurate predictions of gravitational effects. Theln had continued working while others debated, pulling more specialized data sets from archives most delegates didn't know existed. Her appendages moved with increasing urgency as she uncovered information that transformed the situation from embarrassing error into potential scandal. I have found something interesting in classified navigation records, Theln announced, her voice carrying tones that made every delegate focus immediate attention on her display. Military spacecraft, which operate under different calculation protocols than civilian vessels, use gravitational constant that is 3.8% higher than verified laboratory value. Their navigation accuracy exceeds civilian standards significantly. The chamber fell into a new depth of stunned silence. Administrator Krell's holographic projection flickered as he processed implications that transcended mere scientific error and entered territory of deliberate institutional deception. The military knew? Shrix's color patterns showed combinations of shock and outrage that her species normally reserved for territorial violations. They've been using correct value while civilian sector operated with inaccurate constant. Apparently they discovered the discrepancy centuries ago through classified research, Theln continued, reading through files that required security clearances she technically shouldn't possess but had apparently accessed anyway. Rather than announce foundational error in verified standards, they quietly adjusted their calculations and classified the correct value for security reasons. Eric felt anger rising. The human physiological response to discovering institutional incompetence combined with deliberate concealment. So the Bureau has been conducting elaborate verification ceremonies for a constant that military research proved wrong, and nobody thought to mention this? Military operates under different oversight, Administrator Krell said, his translated voice showing defensive patterns. Their research is classified for strategic security. Civilian Bureau doesn't have access to military scientific findings. That's not security, Eric shot back. That's negligence. How many civilian navigation errors happened because ships used inaccurate gravitational constant? How many engineering projects failed because calculations were based on wrong fundamental value? The implications of this revelation sent fresh waves of agitation through the assembled delegates. Researchers began accessing their own institutional archives, searching for evidence of navigation errors or engineering failures that might correlate with the use of incorrect gravitational values. The chamber filled with sounds of outrage, confusion, and demands for accountability. Grom, whose granite-based physiology normally made him one of the calmer presences in any room, produced rumbling sounds that translated as barely controlled fury. The Orbital Construction Guild has lost 23 habitat modules over the past century due to what were attributed to unexpected gravitational anomalies. If those failures resulted from using incorrect fundamental constant, thousands of beings died because of institutional deception. Prismka's light patterns took on sharp, angry hues. The Crystalline Navigation Consortium has maintained correction factor databases for centuries, attributing deviations to local field variations and quantum effects. We developed elaborate theoretical frameworks to explain why our calculations required adjustment. All of it unnecessary compensation for foundational error we were never informed existed. Theln pulled civilian accident reports, comparing them against the timeline of military's discovery of the discrepancy. The correlation appeared immediately obvious once someone looked for it. Navigation errors increased. Orbital construction accidents rose. Planetary engineering projects exceeded predicted costs due to unexpected gravitational effects that were actually just the predictable consequences of using wrong constant. Hundreds of incidents, Theln said quietly. Possibly thousands over the centuries since military research discovered the true value. All attributed to operator error, equipment malfunction, or unexpected local conditions. But the pattern matches what we'd expect if gravitational calculations were systematically inaccurate by 3.7%. The chamber erupted again, though this time the chaos carried undertones of anger rather than confusion. Delegates demanded investigations into military oversight. Research factions called for immediate correction of published constants. Political representatives began calculating how this revelation would affect interstellar relations and whether their civilizations might have legal grounds for demanding compensation for engineering failures caused by deliberately concealed information. Administrator Krell attempted to restore order, his holographic tentacles gesturing with increasingly frantic patterns. We must approach this systematically. First, we verify the corrected constant through independent measurements. Second, we determine the full scope of civilian incidents that may have resulted from using inaccurate values. Third, we establish protocols for announcing the correction without causing panic or economic disruption. Fourth, Eric added, we figure out why institutional oversight permitted military research to classify foundational scientific constants as security secrets. That's not protecting strategic advantage. That's enabling negligent harm. Vornix sat heavily on the platform, his spines producing discordant tones that suggested his nervous system approached shutdown. My entire career has been verifying wrong value to increasing precision. Every paper I published, every student I trained, every technique I developed, all producing accurate measurements of inaccurate constant. Eric felt sympathy despite his frustration with the situation. The measurement techniques are probably fine. You were just measuring the wrong thing in the wrong conditions. Laboratory gravitational constant is accurate for laboratory conditions. It's just not the same as universal gravitational constant in natural environments. That is small comfort when my professional reputation is built on fundamental error, Vornix replied. Theln had moved to the verification apparatus still standing on the platform, examining it with new perspective informed by uncomfortable knowledge. This device measures gravitational attraction between small masses in perfect isolation. We eliminate electromagnetic interference, vacuum conditions prevent atmospheric effects, quantum shielding blocks external fields. We create conditions that don't exist anywhere in the actual universe, then measure gravity in those artificial conditions and call it universal constant. So what's the actual constant? Eric asked. Based on astronomical data and military records, what value should we be using? Theln ran calculations combining multiple data sources, weighting them by measurement precision and sample size. The holographic display showed results converging toward value that was, as preliminary analysis suggested, approximately 3.8% higher than the verified laboratory constant. The military's classified value matched the astronomical observations almost perfectly. "This value," Theln announced, "matches astronomical observations, military navigation records, planetary tide measurements, and binary star orbital mechanics. It represents gravitational constant as it operates in natural conditions rather than laboratory isolation." "We need to verify this," Vornik said, recovering some professional focus despite personal crisis. "Independent measurements from multiple research groups using different methodologies. If we're going to replace 8,000-year-old constant, we need absolute certainty." "Agreed," Administrator Krell said. "I am authorizing emergency research protocols. Every measurement facility in the Bureau will conduct independent verification using both laboratory and astronomical methods. We will determine the accurate universal gravitational constant within the next rotation cycle." "What do we tell everyone else?" Shrix asked, her color patterns showing anxiety about managing what was rapidly becoming the largest scientific scandal in galactic history. "Member civilizations will demand explanation for why foundational constant requires revision. More importantly, they'll demand explanation for why military research discovered the truth centuries ago without informing civilian authorities." "We tell them the truth," Eric suggested. "We measured gravity accurately in laboratory conditions that don't represent natural environments. When we finally checked our laboratory results against actual astronomical data, we discovered the discrepancy." "Military research independently discovered the same discrepancy but classified it for reasons we're now investigating. It's embarrassing but not catastrophic. The correction improves our understanding rather than destroying it." "The human is correct," Theln agreed. "Science advances through discovering errors and correcting them. This represents significant advance, even though it requires acknowledging we've been wrong for millennia. The military's decision to classify the information represents a separate issue requiring investigation, but doesn't change our obligation to publish correct values." The force barriers across the exits deactivated as Administrator Krell lifted the containment protocol. Delegates began filtering out, most heading directly to their own research facilities to begin independent verification. The chamber emptied slowly, conversations continuing in clusters as researchers processed implications and planned their response to the crisis. Eric remained seated in his uncomfortable chair, watching the verification apparatus still standing on the platform. The device represented remarkable engineering achievement, capable of measuring gravitational attraction to absurd precision. It just measured the wrong thing because nobody had thought to check whether laboratory conditions represented universal reality. Vornix approached with the slow movement of someone whose certainty had been shattered. "I owe you apology, human. You asked obvious question that I should have considered decades ago. Instead, I became so focused on precision that I forgot to verify I was precisely measuring the right phenomenon." "You're not the only one," Eric said. "This is institutional failure, not individual error. Everyone involved in verification assumed laboratory measurements represented universal truth without checking. That's a systemic problem with how the Bureau operates. Nevertheless, you demonstrated courage in questioning established methodology despite being relative newcomer to galactic science," Vornix continued. "That perspective is valuable especially when, it proves uncomfortable." Theln had remained behind as well, her aquatic appendages moving through data streams with continued focus. "I am finding more anomalies now that I know to look for them. Stellar dynamics, galactic rotation curves, gravitational lensing observations, all show deviations from predictions based on laboratory constant. We attributed these to dark matter or exotic physics, but some may simply result from using inaccurate fundamental value." "How much of theoretical physics is built on this wrong constant?" Eric asked. "Unknown," Theln admitted. "Possibly significant portions. We will need comprehensive review of foundational research across multiple disciplines. This extends beyond measurement standards into fundamental theoretical framework. Some dark matter calculations might be compensating for gravitational constant error." Some exotic physics theories might be elaborate explanations for discrepancies that wouldn't exist if we used correct values. Over the following rotation cycle, research facilities across the galaxy conducted independent measurements using methodologies that incorporated both laboratory precision and astronomical validation. The results converged toward value approximately 3.8% higher than the verified laboratory constant, with variation that reflected genuine measurement uncertainty rather than systematic error. The verification process revealed additional complications that the initial discovery had only hinted at. Different research groups, using different astronomical datasets and measurement techniques, all confirmed the discrepancy but showed subtle variations in the precise value of the correction. The scatter in measurements was small. All results fell within 3.7 to 3.9% above the laboratory value, but significant enough to generate debate about which specific value should become the new standard. Eric found himself drafted into the working group responsible for synthesizing all the verification data into a single recommended constant. His role as the person who'd initiated the crisis apparently qualified him to help resolve it, despite his protests that he was just an engineer who'd asked an obvious question. The working group met in a smaller conference facility, mercifully equipped with chairs designed for human anatomy. Theln led the technical analysis, while Vornex contributed his expertise in measurement uncertainty. Prismka provided crystalline precision in data analysis, and Grom offered perspectives on how different gravitational regimes might require different correction factors. The variation in our measurements may be telling us something important, Theln suggested during one particularly long session. Perhaps the gravitational constant isn't actually constant across all conditions. Maybe it varies slightly with field strength, or distance scales, or local matter density. That would complicate everything, Vornex noted, his spines vibrating with tones suggesting he wasn't sure whether to be excited or horrified by the possibility. A constant that varies with conditions isn't a constant. It's a variable that we've been treating as constant. Wouldn't be the first time, Eric said. Human physics went through similar realization with speed of light being constant while time and space were variable. Sometimes what seems obviously constant turns out to be the thing that changes. The working group spent days analyzing whether the scatter in measurements represented experimental error or genuine physical variation. Eventually, they concluded that while the gravitational parameter might show subtle dependencies on extreme conditions, for most practical purposes, a single corrected constant would serve adequately. They recommended a value 3.78% higher than the laboratory standard, with documented uncertainty bounds that would accommodate the observed variation. The Bureau's official announcement caused exactly the scandal Shrix had feared, with additional complications from member civilizations demanding investigations into why military research had discovered the truth centuries earlier without sharing it with civilian scientific community. Political debates erupted about oversight, classification policies, and institutional responsibility. Several engineering guilds filed formal complaints demanding compensation for failed projects that had been attributed to design flaws, but were actually caused by using incorrect gravitational calculations. The Orbital Construction Guild's demand for accountability regarding their 23 lost habitat modules sparked particular controversy, as forensic analysis of the incidents revealed that most could have been prevented with accurate gravitational values. The military's classification of the corrected constant became subject of multiple investigations. Defense officials argued that maintaining navigational advantage over potential adversaries justified the secrecy. Civilian oversight committees countered that fundamental physical constants couldn't be classified as security secrets without violating scientific transparency principles that underpinned galactic cooperation. Eric watched these political battles unfold with mixture of fascination and frustration. He'd asked a simple question about methodology and somehow triggered civilizational reckoning with institutional failures that spanned centuries. The experience felt simultaneously empowering and exhausting. But beneath the scandal and recriminations, something more important happened. Researchers across the galaxy began checking their foundational assumptions, testing whether laboratory measurements matched natural phenomena, questioning whether precision in controlled conditions actually represented universal truth. The ripple effects extended far beyond gravitational physics. Other measurement standards came under scrutiny. Temperature scales were compared against stellar atmospheric observations. Electromagnetic constants were validated against cosmic radiation patterns. Quantum values were checked against astronomical quantum phenomena. In almost every case, researchers found subtle discrepancies between laboratory standards and natural measurements. Most discrepancies were smaller than the gravitational constant error, but their existence suggested systematic problem with how the Bureau had approached standardization. The focus on laboratory precision had created measurement standards that were accurate for conditions that rarely existed outside laboratories. Eric attended the follow-up verification session where the Bureau officially adopted the corrected gravitational constant. The ceremony lacked the grandiose overtones of the previous session, replaced with more subdued acknowledgement that they were fixing error rather than celebrating achievement. Vornix presided again, though his harmonic tones carried different quality than before. We gather to verify the universal gravitational constant, using methodologies that incorporate both laboratory precision and astronomical validation. This represents improved understanding of gravitational phenomena across natural conditions, rather than isolated laboratory environments. The new verification apparatus incorporated sensors that could measure gravitational effects at multiple scales simultaneously, comparing laboratory masses against astronomical observations in real time. The device represented collaborative engineering effort to create measurement systems that could validate laboratory precision against natural reality. The results confirmed the corrected constant to precision that satisfied even the most pedantic delegates. The value of 3.78% above the old laboratory standard matched astronomical observations across all tested scales and conditions. The corrected value, Vornix announced, matches observed natural phenomena while maintaining theoretical consistency. This represents scientific progress through acknowledging error and implementing correction. We have also established new verification protocols requiring all fundamental constants to be validated against both laboratory measurements and natural observations. The audience response was subdued compared to previous ceremonies. Nobody celebrated discovering they'd been wrong for 8,000 years. But there was also palpable relief that the error had been found and corrected before it caused larger problems. The session included presentations on the broader implications of the discovery. Theln showed how the corrected constant resolved anomalies in galactic rotation curves that had previously been attributed to dark matter. Prismka demonstrated how gravitational lensing observations made more sense with accurate values. Grom presented analysis showing that many quantum gravitational effects were actually just manifestations of using incorrect classical constant. Eric sat in his chair, still uncomfortable but less torturous than the original seat, watching the presentations and thinking about how one simple question had cascaded into fundamental revision of galactic physics. He thought about all the researchers who'd spent careers studying exotic phenomena that turned out to be artifacts of measurement error, about all the elaborate theories developed to explain discrepancies that wouldn't exist with correct constants. After the ceremony, Theln approached with several other researchers who'd been conducting follow-up investigations. We have discovered additional measurement standards that may require similar validation. Temperature scales, electromagnetic constants, quantum values, all verified under laboratory conditions without astronomical confirmation. Would you be interested in collaboration to review these standards? Absolutely, Eric said. Though I should warn you, I'll keep asking uncomfortable questions about methodology. Good, Theln replied. That is exactly what scientific collaboration should involve. Constant questioning prevents institutional certainty from replacing actual accuracy. Vornix joined them, his spines vibrating with tones that suggested he'd reached acceptance of the new reality. I am revising my textbook on measurement verification. The new version will emphasize importance of validating laboratory results against natural phenomena. I would appreciate human perspective on methodological chapters, particularly regarding how to maintain healthy skepticism about precision measurements. I'd be happy to help, Eric said, meaning it. Though I'm not sure I'm qualified to write textbook chapters. You identified systematic error that persisted for 8 millennia, Vornix countered. That qualifies you to discuss methodology failures better than most credentialed researchers who miss the same error repeatedly. Administrator Krell broadcast final announcements about updated calculation protocols and revised measurement standards. The Bureau would implement new verification procedures requiring both laboratory precision and natural validation for all fundamental constants. Member civilizations would receive corrected constants along with recommendations for updating their navigation systems, engineering calculations, and theoretical frameworks. The announcement included information about the military classification investigation, which had concluded that while the secrecy had been technically legal under defense research protocols, it violated the spirit of scientific cooperation that the Bureau was founded to promote. New oversight procedures would prevent similar situations in the future, requiring military research into fundamental constants to be shared with civilian authorities within reasonable timeframes. The process of updating 8,000 years of accumulated research would take decades. Some older researchers would never fully accept that their life's work had been built on inaccurate foundations. But progress would happen anyway, carried forward by those willing to acknowledge error and implement correction. Eric eventually left the chamber, heading through Concordia Hub's corridors toward his quarters. He passed laboratories where researchers had already begun checking other fundamental constants against natural phenomena, questioning assumptions that had seemed too obvious to require verification. The gravitational constant had been wrong. Turned out when you measured things in artificial conditions that didn't exist in nature, you got artificial results that didn't represent natural reality. And sometimes the most important thing a scientist could do was ask why nobody had checked whether laboratory measurements matched the actual universe they were supposed to describe. Precision meant nothing if you were precisely wrong. But accuracy, even with less precision, meant everything. As Eric walked, he considered the broader implications of what had happened. The discovery had exposed more than just measurement error. It had revealed how institutional structures could perpetuate mistakes through generations, how the pursuit of precision could become divorced from accuracy, how the desire for certainty could override the need for validation. The Bureau would change. The military oversight would improve. The measurement standards would better reflect natural reality. But the fundamental lesson remained. Sometimes the most valuable contribution to science wasn't sophisticated analysis or precise measurement. Sometimes it was just asking the obvious question that everyone else had agreed to ignore. And sometimes being precisely right about being wrong was more important than being precisely wrong with confidence. If you enjoyed this story and want more cinematic sci-fi like this, support the channel. Click the link in my bio to help me keep these stories alive.